Hi everybody, welcome to Digital Photography Made Easy. My name's Bart Levy and I'm the instructor for this course. And what I want to do here real quickly for you is take my Digital Photography Made Easy course, which runs about 3 hours and there's about 10 modules, and I'm going to boil it down into 5 minutes so you can learn everything you need to know about photography in about 5 minutes. Sound good? Well, let's get right after it. So the first thing we're going to need to learn about photography is what the aperture or f-stop is. That's that opening in the front of the lens that either lets in more or less light, and we can adjust it accordingly. So the reason for doing it is what we call an exposure reason, and we can let in more light or less light to get to what we call a perfect exposure. So we don't want it to be too bright and we don't want it to be too dark. But there's another reason for using aperture or f-stop, and that's something we call depth of field. So in depth of field, what we learn is that the bigger the opening, then the less that's in focus in a depth of field sense. So let me show you how we're going to illustrate that. When we use f2, which is a pretty big aperture opening, only 2 glasses are going to be in focus. But then if we use f4, you can see 1, 2, 3, 4 are in focus before it starts dropping off and getting blurry. But then if I use f11, which is a smaller aperture opening, you can see that all 11 are in focus. And one of the things I like to do is tie this into some things that we can all understand. For example, have you ever had your eyes dilated? So when you dilate your eyes, what do you notice right away? Things are really bright and not very much in focus. So a dilated eye is like a large or open aperture like this. So let's talk a little bit more about focus or depth of field. If I leave a big aperture opening, less is going to be in focus. The bigger the opening, the less it's in focus. So watch what happens. Right here we can see this is very much in focus, but it's very blurry in the background. If I change to a smaller aperture opening, look what happens. All of a sudden both of them are in complete focus. So that's how aperture is going to work for us in an exposure and a depth of field sense. On the other hand, there's something else we have to look at that's going to change our exposure, and that's something called the shutter speed. So the image is going to pass through the aperture and it's going to come back over here and be blocked from the sensor by the shutter. But as soon as I press the button, you can see the shutter is going to jump up out of the way and then it's going to come back down. So once more, it's going to jump up out of the way and let the light hit the sensor, and then it's going to come back down again and it's going to close it up and end the exposure. So the time that it's up that it's open is called the shutter speed, and the longer the shutter is open, the more light. The shorter time the shutter is open, the less light. So we can use shutter speed for exposure as well. And if we're looking for this to be the best exposure, then what we might do is change our shutter speed to make sure that happens. We don't want it to be too light and we don't want it to be too dark. But just like with aperture, there's also going to be an artistic reason for changing our shutter speed, and that is to either show motion or to stop action. So if our priority in taking our pictures is either to show motion or stop action, then our priority is going to be shutter speed. So if I want a really smooth looking kind of surreal effect from the water coming over these rocks, I'm going to use a really slow shutter speed. But on the other hand, if I want it to look a little bit more chaotic and I want to freeze the water, then I'm going to use a fast shutter speed. When I'm talking about how to use my camera, I'm also going to talk quite a bit about how to focus the camera. So do I want to focus on the teacup here and leave Alice from Alice in Wonderland in the back here blurry? Or do I want to have her in focus and do I want her teacups blurry? That's what we call focus area modes and selective focus. The other thing we'll talk quite a bit about is what kind of lens are we going to use to make this happen. So lens selections and depth of field. Some people think long lenses are just for sports and wildlife. Not so. You can use it for close-ups and depth of field as well. So here I'm close up on the statue. Background so blurry you can't even see what's going on. Over here, blurry or in focus here, blurry in the background, but just by changing that aperture over here, you can see that now the hand's in focus and this is coming into focus in the background as well. A couple other things we're going to talk about is exposure modes, which means how much as I look through the viewfinder, how much is the camera deciding to use to set an exposure. And also we're going to talk about something fun called RAW versus JPEG. And if you get two photographers in a room and one's shooting in RAW and one's shooting in JPEG, they're going to duke it out. And we're going to talk about what is camera RAW, what's a JPEG, file size and quality, and which one you should use. The other thing that happens a lot of times is people take pictures and they get these weird colors. And so they're having a problem with white or color balance. So we're going to talk quite a bit about that as well. So if your goal in photography is to become a better photographer, maybe stop actions and get some good shots, maybe work on depth of field a little bit, then you definitely want to come to digitalphotographymadeeasy.com and sign up for the Digital Photography Made Easy course. I really appreciate your time and I'll look forward to seeing you there.